Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Truth. I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hessen, back with a brand new episode here on The Truth. Back once again with my boy AJ Ponciano. AJ, how are you doing here today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself now?
I'm doing great as well. We got through Thanksgiving. It was another full slate. I didn't realize till actually like the other day that there are no bye weeks in week 13 just because of the Thanksgiving games, Black Friday, Sunday. But then there's a bye week next week. And I wish in a way it was kind of flipped because obviously week 14 is like probably the most pivotal week because for most fantasy leagues, it's the last week of the regular season before playoffs. But it is what it is. So you got a big chunk of an Armageddon chunk of buys on week 12, no buys on week 13, and then buys on week 14. I know the Ravens are on buys, some other key teams as well. So for your fantasy teams out there that are kind of on the brink and need a big week 14, you're going to be without some teams. So hopefully we're able to kind of help with that here today. As we're not previewing week 14 yet, we're going to actually recap week 13 in the NFL, a huge fun, jam-packed weekend, Thanksgiving weekend. I watched a lot of football this weekend from Thanksgiving Day football in the NFL, obviously, and then college football, my Hawkeyes on Friday. But honestly, when I was watching college football on Friday, I really felt like it was like Saturday because there was games like throughout the day. And it was like, 2 days of Saturday night football or Saturday night football on Friday and Saturday, whole slate on Thursday, whole slate on Sunday. Monday night game literally just started at the time of recording this. So there's a perfect week of football, just continuously, obviously towards the end of the seasons in the NFL and in college. But enough yibby yabbing. Today we're going to go ahead and give you our week 13 takeaways. We each have 5 takeaways, both in the NFL and fantasy. It's kind of combined. Some may be fantasy, some may be NFL. For those loyal listeners out there, you guys know the drill. But anyways, go ahead and give me your first takeaway from week 13.
I unfortunately called the Christian McCaffrey re-injury. I thought they rushed him back way too early. I get it. It was also like over 10 weeks into the season at that point. But it just didn't make sense, especially for a team that wasn't really winning up to that point, had a bad defense, offense really wasn't rolling. And the worst part about it was CMC's PCL injury, which she is in IR for for the remainder of the year, is that Jordan Mason also follows him. So if you're in a league where Isaac Guerendo is there, I mean, you have to go pick him up. He's going to be that running back one there. We saw it with Jordan Mason when CMC didn't start the year. I mean, just bad news for the 49ers all the way around. I mean, the breakout running back that they had in Jordan Mason going down with a high ankle sprain, he's going to be there for probably at least 2 weeks, probably 3 weeks up to this point. So he may be back for like the championship game in some of our fantasy leagues. But right now, Guerendo looks like he's going to be the RB1. He's someone that you're going to have to go pick up. I think that he will be picked up in probably 60 to 70% of leagues if he's not already rostered, just because we've already seen what the 49ers running backs can do when they're healthy.
Yeah, I mean, that's my first takeaway. So I'm going to echo that. Probably not spend too much time on it. But I mean, just insult to injury for the 49ers. Like it was one thing after another. I wouldn't say necessarily they rushed Christian McCaffrey back. I think they did wait. Obviously, we don't know the full story, right? We obviously weren't expecting really Christian McCaffrey to miss the first game. We all thought he was going to play, and then he ended up going on IR, and the rest is history. But I think what made the situation worse is the conditions that the 49ers had to play in Buffalo. I mean, honestly, as you know, I traded for Christian McCaffrey in our dynasty league. Obviously, didn't work out. But I was watching that game and I was like, I don't feel like he should be playing right now because it's snowy, it's slippery, it's just not a good thing. And at first, when he went down, I go, great, non-contact. Maybe he messed up his Achilles because he was kind of walking as such, like maybe he strained it again, whatever. And then they had said it was a knee injury, and then Kyle Shanahan after the break said, yeah, he's not returning. I go, well, there goes his season. But I think it was a PCL strain, but he's out 6 weeks. He's out the rest of the year. I don't think the 49ers are going to be making the postseason, but more than that, they're not going to be relevant for your fantasy seasons because the fantasy playoffs are coming up and they'll be done before he even has a chance at coming back. So kind of a tough situation there to say the least for Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, you don't want that for anybody, but especially a guy like Christian McCaffrey. And most importantly, I guess, the Madden curse lives on. The Madden curse has been doing its service for, I don't know, 5, 6 years now, it seems like. And it's an unfortunate curse, but it's something that's just an unfortunate luck of the draw situation to begin with. So tough there for Christian McCaffrey. On top of that, Jordan Mason, randomly, I guess. And I wouldn't say randomly. I wasn't paying attention to the fact that he's also now on IR. So he's going to miss the next 4 games. So he's done for your fantasy season. So what does that mean? It's Isaac Guerendo time. Pick him up, pick him up, pick him up. Because look, I was already kind of hesitant with McCaffrey, obviously dealing with an injury, but the 49ers, I was thinking we're just going to sit him if they became out of it. And that was going to be an opportunity for Mason and Guerrero to get a lot of playing time. Well, now that Mason and McCaffrey are out for both of your leagues, that's the guy that's going to get the majority of the carries the rest of the way. Now, they probably will pick up a running back or two or sign somebody from their practice squad just because Elijah Mitchell, if we don't forget about him, he's out for the year as well. So the running back room is depleted, but it's Isaac Guerrero time. Pick him up, pick him up, pick him up. That 49ers offense is going to get the job done, even if they're not making the postseason. And he's looking for a huge output going into next week and even the future weeks and the rest of the fantasy season. So pick him up, pick him up, pick him up. What about your second takeaway?
The Chiefs keep finding ways to win games that they shouldn't be winning. This week, it wasn't really because of uh, like the refs and because of penalties. It was just a dumb play by the center and quarterback that never had much chemistry together. They haven't played a lot together. Uh, O'Connell came out and said it was on him that he hit clapped too early for the snap count, and that may have been it. But that also could have just been the quarterback taking the blame for a second. Because we've seen quarterbacks go and talk about it in the presser. But the main thing is just the Chiefs winning games. Another game that they just shouldn't have won. I mean, the Chiefs Broncos game a few weeks back. That's a game that they probably should have lost. This week, the exact same scenario. Probably again they should have lost. With the Raiders being right there in field goal position, just kind of needing to wind down some clock. I mean, it was right there for them. There's just been a lot of games this year that's been like either penalties or something just dumb happens and they keep winning. So, I mean, for Chiefs fans, I mean, they just got to be happy that they're winning games, but they aren't winning games by huge margins like how we saw early on in Patrick Mahomes' careers. We've had a lot of sub 5 point games or sub 5 point wins up to this point. I mean, yeah, there's been a lot has just been going on. I mean, the Falcons they only beat by 5. They beat the Bengals by 1. Just games like that. Like I said, the Broncos game only won by 2 there. Only won by 3 against Carolina. Only won against 2 against the Raiders. I mean, the offense isn't the same. The defense just found ways and they've gone penalties and just dumb stuff has gone their way. Feels like they've almost just been really lucky this year for how badly Mahomes at least started out the year playing that to be where they're at.
So mine's kind of one that's probably gonna get a lot of hate, and it's just don't panic on Cousins. Okay, I know Cousins, right? I'm a little bit of a homer just because Kirk Cousins was a Viking, still my favorite Viking, probably of all time, which is sad. But he obviously had a tremendous career there in Minnesota. Has not had a good start to the career in Atlanta, and I guess it was going to show that look, he wasn't worth all the money. I think it was like 100 million in guarantees, like 180 total, 4 years, right? He's 36, coming off an Achilles injury. Everyone knows the story, but he has not looked good the last couple of games. Arguably, I'm not going to say arguably, despite the situation and everything going on with him, that was his worst game that he ever had in his career. And I've seen some bad games in Minnesota. 245 yards, 0 touchdowns, 4 interceptions on the day, 2.1 fantasy points. Not going to get it done. I think in his last like 3 games, he has 0 touchdowns, has 6 interceptions, lost a couple fumbles as well. So it's just been bad for Kirk Cousins, and everybody knows that. And I know that too. But I don't think it's necessarily something you should just kind of jump the gun and immediately drop him. I think people are going to be, panicking about Kirk Cousins. I think a lot of people are going to be talking about, is it Michael Penix Jr.'s turn, like this and that. But Kirk Cousins obviously has proven himself as a quarterback. I know it doesn't look great right now, but I wouldn't panic. He's obviously going to be dropped in probably half the leagues and dropped to that 30-40%. But if you're in need of a quarterback, I mean, this is an Atlanta team that's really trying to take a hold of that NFC South division with a lot of unknowns in that division and has a good chance to continue to move forward. And on top of that, Kirk Cousins is going to a revenge game next week in Minnesota. You think he's going to want to perform well against the Vikings, who basically said, hey, we're not going to pay him? Yeah, he's going to pay well. So I think looking at Kirk Cousins, I think there is cause for concern. Don't get me wrong, but I think he could definitely be a reliable option. And I don't see the Falcons going to Penix, but it's the Falcons. They drafted Penix 8 overall, and I wasn't expecting Daniel Jones to immediately be demoted to QB3 when he got benched. So you never know in the NFL. It's a changing door every day. But I think looking forward, I think you have some optimism with Kirk Cousins, especially now when he's at his most vulnerable, it seems like. Okay, your third takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna piggy off the Kirk Cousins thing. That was my next part. is that the overreaction to start that people calling for Kirk Cousins to be benched and starting Penix. I understand what you mean. Like you mentioned, yeah, the last 3 games, 6 interceptions, no passing touchdowns, and he has 4 fumbles. I mean, just churn over after churn over. It's been bad. Uh, Last week just didn't look good. Once they did start getting momentum, he threw an interception. They got to the red zone or within the 30 at least twice and threw interceptions there last week against the Chargers. It hasn't looked good, but yeah. I mean, we know who Kirk Cousins is. I mean, this is a bad little slide that he's going on, but we've seen Kirk Cousins also be one of the best quarterbacks in the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns. He always finishes top five. At least the last couple of years he's been healthy, he's finished top five in both those categories consecutive years with the Vikings. It's just the overreaction. It was just for people calling for Penix to be the starter for next week. It's just funny in my opinion. It's not really fancy relevant because yeah, people are going to drop him, but I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, go pick up Penix or Penix is going to start this week. I think it's just such an overreaction that as a Saints fan, I love seeing Falcons fans just get absolutely go crazy over like the smallest things. Like they still have an opportunity to win the division, and they're freaking out right now because their quarterback they paid all this money to isn't playing like the money they're paying him, which I understand. But again, you're still in it for the division right now. And so long, it's going to be a hard road to win it and try to get to the playoffs, but there still is a road there.
And just to kind of piggyback off that point a little bit more, everyone always says the most popular position in football is the backup quarterback, right? Everybody, including myself, wants to see the backup quarterback, but that doesn't always mean that it's the right option. In fact, a lot of times, let's say they put Penix in. 2 weeks later, he's terrible. Now the Falcons are out of playoff contention. And to be frank, and no offense to you as a Saints fan, the NFC South overall is just not looking too hot from top to bottom. So there is opportunity for Kirk Cousins to have bad games. There is opportunity for him to kind of go through some of those pains. I wouldn't say growing pains because he's been in the league forever, but still recovering from an injury. That it's just not the answer that although everyone thinks is the right answer, it's most of the time not. And at once in a blue moon, like the Tom Brady, Drew Bledsoe situation, does the backup quarterback actually work? My next takeaway was Rico Dowdle, in my opinion, is somewhat fantasy relevant. Last week, 22 carries, 112 yards, 1 touchdown on Thanksgiving, 21.3 fantasy points with 3 catches and 11 yards. Week before that, 1986 and 10.8 fantasy points. Like he's starting to get some fantasy relevancy. And I think a large part of that was the fact that he wasn't able to early on because Cooper Rush in that offense was slowed down. Even Dak Prescott, it seemed like Dak Prescott couldn't even get the running game going. But Cooper Rush has done a good job of settling down and had this offense actually flowing. And that's opened a lot of opportunities for the running backs, primarily Rico Dowdle, to have success. Now, 3 receptions, 11 yards, that's an extra 4 fantasy points that I could probably see consistently on top of the rushing output and rushing touchdown volume that Rico Dowdle is going to get. Now, Cowboys never seem like they're ever going to rebuild, especially mid-season. I think the Cowboys are going to continue to push, even if they're going to be out of it. I think Rico Dowdle can kind of step up to the plate and be a successful running back. On top of that, he's rostered in 74.3% of leagues. So he's rostered in about a fourth of leagues across the United States, or I guess the world for that matter. And I think a lot of people aren't giving him the recognition that he deserves, especially as an RB1. The Cowboys have made it clear they're not really going to split time with Rico Dowdle and Zeke Elliott. Not at all. Zeke went like a couple of games with getting like 2 carries in like 4 games total. Like it's just not going to happen. Rico Dowdle is going to get mouth fed the ball 20 to 25 carries at least every game. The 80, 90 yards are going to come in the occasional touchdown. Like it just screams volume. It screams consistency. And even at a running back 2 position, Rico Dowdle could be a great bang for your buck, especially at this point in the season. All right, what about your next takeaway?
Bucky Irving is good at football. I mean, he a great week, great back-to-back weeks up to this point. I had to go back and look at our fantasy or our draft rankings coming into this year, and I completely forgot I had Bucky Irving as my second favorite running back, and I do remember saying at the time that was a biased pick because I am an Oregon fan, but you know what? That biased pick's looking real good right now. I mean, I would say that he's the best rookie running back in this draft right now. That's playing this season. Corum's looked all right. Braylon Allen hasn't played a whole lot. Jonathan Brooks, I believe this was his first or second game, actually gained some snaps. But Bucky this week, I mean, great week. 25 rush attempts, which is the most we've seen this season out of him. 152 rushing yards. Again, another career high right there. Rushing touchdown. 3 receptions for 33 yards. I mean, just every facet was good. In the receiving game, obviously he got in the end zone, finished with 185 total yards. He did finish the game with an injury, though, that last drive and overtime. He wasn't in the game because he did have a rib injury, it looked like. They panned over to the sideline. I was watching the game, and he had like a heat pack wrapped around his side. So I think it was a rib injury or some type of uh, middle of the body injury like that. But I wouldn't be too worried. Bucky Irving, I wouldn't say he's must start right now, but maybe this week with injuries that we've seen. I mean, he's someone, if you have Christian McCaffrey or Jordan Mason, if you have the handcuff or if you had him, but Bucky Irvin's probably not out there in many leagues, but he's someone that you got to try to talk around, try to like get some type of trade. I know some leagues, their trade deadline, they just don't have a trade deadline, and I know a lot of teams go out like the week before playoffs and go try to get someone. I could see that being Bucky Irving, especially if Atlanta or not Atlanta, yeah, sorry, yes, if Atlanta loses out and isn't playing well, and the Bucks are able to start winning, Bucky Irving, I mean, he had the most carries, he had the most rush attempts. He actually had the most receptions out of the RB room. Usually, Rashad White has at least 3 to 4. Bucky Irving had 3. He led the way there. The running backs. I mean, without the injury there, he could have had an even bigger day in a close game.
Yeah, obviously Bucky Irving's been a stud. It was a kind of a steal, I would say, in the dynasty draft that we had, at least for now. I think I got him in the third round, like 12th pick in the third
You
round.
picked him right
And
before me.
obviously,
Had the
yeah,
had
and
you
I knew
you
you were
picked
going to
him
pick
right
him
before
too.
me.
But I was like, you know what? And I know everybody don't do this. I'm like, let me trust AJ on this one. And right now, he's the only running back on my roster. I got to make some moves because Christian McCaffrey well, okay, it's not my only running back on the roster,
Sharps.
but only relevant running back per se. Yeah, Sharps, of course. But
You got the end zone.
with Christian McCaffrey good. I know, and he's been doing good. I mean, overall, I mean, I think that's more of a longevity pull. I'm saying right now, trying to contend, but yeah, he's definitely done a great job, and I'm glad I listened to your advice on that one. The next takeaway is hello. I mean, Steelers offense. What the hell? Where did this come from? I mean, if this is anything of what Arthur Smith could do as a coordinator, I mean, that really opened up the door to just a lot of things as a whole. I mean, they won against the Bengals on the road 44-38 in a slugfest that nobody was expecting. Obviously, Russ, 29 for 38, 414, 3 touchdowns and an interception. Najee, 16-75 and a score. Also had 6 catches for 54 yards. Pickens had a big game. Freiermuth had a big game. Even Jalen Warren had some production. Like, this Pittsburgh offense just seemingly kind of came out of nowhere. And I think it kind of speaks volumes to this Pittsburgh team as a whole. I give more credit to Mike Tomlin than I ever will in my life to Arthur Smith, just because of how he depleted that Atlanta Falcons team. But the Steelers offense is rolling. And I mean, I don't have the numbers right on my script at the moment, but looking at Steelers players as a whole, I think a lot of them are kind of undervalued, especially guys like Najee, Russ, Freiermuth. Pickens is obviously a good one, but there's a lot of players in the Steelers team that I think are extremely undervalued. So looking at the Steelers' progress and the progression that they've had, especially these past couple of games where they've been playing the divisional opponents, I think is a huge step in the right direction for this offense. And I think you should really kind of consider starting some Steelers because they've been able to not only do this in the division, but they've been doing it on the road and in the division at the same time, which is huge. I mean, obviously, I think there's going to be a lot of additions for guys like Russ, Freiermuth, even Najee for those that don't have Najee rostered. But I think a big thing moving forward is just to kind of see what the Steelers offense can do. But I definitely would start to buy the hype, especially in those guys like Pickens and some other guys that maybe not get much recognition because this offense is flowing now. And it seems like game like 6 or so from Russ. And I think this offense is going to continue to grow and flourish. But they'll have their down weeks, don't get me wrong. But I've seen a lot of more positives than I would negatives, especially at this point in the season. Okay, what about your final takeaway?
Caleb Williams maybe you start this next week. 2 great games in a row. Threw for 340 yards 2 weeks ago against Minnesota. 2 touchdowns, no reception. 6 rush attempts for 33 yards. Last week in loss against Detroit, 256 yards, 3 touchdowns, no receptions, 4 rush attempts for 39 yards. One of the big things we've seen these streaks out of Caleb Williams, and also they just fired Matt Eberflus, which is their head coach. And again, we've seen it week in week out how good teams can be the week after a head coach firing, especially Caleb Williams playing well back-to-back weeks against divisional opponents. I wouldn't be surprised if he would be a good start this week just because of all those underlying factors that we've seen week in and week out up to this point. Grant, the Bears aren't good. I mean, they're going against the 49ers, which is actually one of the easier opponents that they're going to face in these last couple games. Like I said, 2 divisional opponents, one against Minnesota, not the best pass defense, but then Detroit, who is one of the better pass defenses in the league. Back-to-back good games, 5 touchdowns, no turnovers. just under 600 total or 600 passing yards, 72 rushing yards. Again, a banged up 49ers team that's defensively been one of the worst in under the Shanahan era there at the head coach. I mean, he may be a good start this week. And one of the things that with Caleb Williams, like I said, the streakiness, we've seen it. We've seen that long stretch. I want to say it was four games before his last two. No touchdowns, no interceptions. But that's also the other thing. He's getting good amount of pass attempts. Yeah, he wasn't throwing for touchdowns, but he wasn't turning the ball over. He was just really bad at pushing the ball down the field, but he was getting the pass attempts. He's got some confidence underneath him. Again, firing up the head coach could be something that could be a good start. I know I have him in one of my leagues. It's between him and Jared Goff this week, I believe, are the two quarterbacks I have. And I'm back and forth on who I want to start.
So my final takeaway is kind of similarly to what I just talked about with the Steelers, but more with the Panthers. I mean, the Panthers offense is showing me a little bit something, particularly Bryce Young. I mean, he's had a great couple of games ever since he came back as a starter for the most part, and he's having more fun. He looks overall just more athletic, right? We know obviously he's going to be a rush threat, but he's throwing the ball more efficiently, getting that connection with a lot of those young receivers, even veteran receivers like Adam Thielen. But Bryce Young last week, 26 for 46, 298 and a score, just 3 carries for 17 yards, but a rushing touchdown as well. Chuba Hubbard, I mean, was the only down spot, 12 carries, 43 yards, but he's still getting force-fed the ball, especially with Jonathan Brooks back. So that is something to worth note. And on the wide receiver side, Adam Thielen in his second game back from injury, 8 catches, 99 yards and a score. Tommy Tremble, 5 for 7, 77. Xavier Legette, 4 for 53. So, like, there are some pieces on this Panthers offense. Would I trust the Panthers or Steelers offense more? I'd say Steelers. But at least for this point, moving forward, I definitely think there's an opportunity for some young guys, especially in those deeper leagues, to kind of get those Carolina Panthers, players in the right direction. So I think there's a lot of things to be excited about with this Panthers team. I think they're obviously still kind of far from stardom, but maybe as you make your championship run to add some depth pieces, or even as we kind of look forward to next season, it seems that Bryce Young will be the quarterback, and we can see kind of where this Panthers team moves going forward. But at least I've seen a lot of promise the past couple of games, and just that tough loss to Tampa Bay on a game-winning kick. But other than that, the biggest thing for Panthers fans, I think, is optimism, because they thought they'd have to even go back and rebuild once again, and just been a sticky situation. So just something to note moving forward, and maybe there are some deep guy threats that you could definitely put in your team to have more success, and can kind of be a little bit of a sleeper choice. Thank you guys for listening to another episode here on The Truth. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure you follow The Truth on Twitter, The Truth as one, to stay up to date with the latest information regarding The Truth, including podcast dates, podcast uploads, and other important information you don't want to miss. Make sure you guys also follow The Truth on Instagram and TikTok at the.tt.truth. Are you looking to find a drink that offers peak hydration, raises your energy levels, speeds up your recovery, and keeps your mind sharp through focused memory? Look no further than Acid Rainwater. I'm excited to partner with Bloodline Sports, AZ, and Acid Rainwater, which focuses on peak hydration and productivity while also maintaining ecosystem-friendly product. Use code HESSON15, that's HESSON15 for 15% off every purchase. As always, I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, joined once again by AJ Ponciano. Take care and good night.